We welcome Shannon Deer to the show. Shannon, how are you doing today?
I'm great. It's good to be here. Good to be here in the other seat. I'm still in the same seat, by the way. But it's good to be here in the guest seat for a little bit. Yeah.
Do you feel like you're in the hot seat?
A little. No, I'm excited.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
You should be. How was your weekend?
It was good. Guess what I did?
Wakeboarding. No.
Yes.
Yeah, you did?
Oh, yeah, okay. Of course. I went wakeboarding. It was great.
I find it fascinating that after 8 years of not wakeboarding, you've been wakeboarding 6 times in the last...
I mean, every weekend, pretty much. I skipped 2 recently because one, they were closed, and then the other one, felt like I needed a break from injury. But otherwise, I've been every weekend.
What inspired you to get back to it? Or made you feel like you could or had to?
Nothing inspired me to leave it exactly. So there wasn't anywhere to go here. So I had to drive like 3 hours to get somewhere good to go wakeboard. I mean, you could go behind a boat here, but I don't have a boat. And I'm 10 years older than most people who wakeboard around here. So, it was a little hard to find a group lately. So, and then I'd hurt my back and just kind of constantly had injuries over the summer. And so I just hadn't gone. And then I was kind of scared to go because it is really easy to injure yourself. It's not so easy to injure yourself gravely at the level that I am, but it is really easy. I mean, every weekend pretty much I've had some kind of an injury. So like major bruises, like my whole back is covered in a bruise or or my hands. I've told y'all my hands haven't had feeling. So, I can get injured and I'm feeling older and makes that hard.
So I'm guessing you do, I can't name any professional wakeboarders, but you ramp off, you do like backflip, twirl.
Right.
And then that's how you're getting those back bruises.
Right. So no back flips to speak of yet, but I do go off of the elements, or some of them, not all of them.
So that's like a ramp?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like the back bruise was, I landed on the corner of the ramp and it wasn't pretty. It was kind of cool. I played soccer growing up. My sister and I would always be like, I have the better injury than you do. And look at this. I tore my leg up on the turf. And then I don't know why we thought that was so cool, but you heal a lot faster. And so when I got the big bruise, I sent her a picture and I was like,
what's up?
I think I might have beat every injury we ever had.
In an unrelated story, she's going wakeboarding this weekend.
Yeah.
To try and top your injury.
Oh yeah, no, she's my sister. No, she's not stupid like that. But so it's fun. I love it. I used to say I would wakeboard 24 hours a day if I didn't have to like pay the bills and eat, stuff like that.
That's awesome.
It's fun. I love it.
All right. So to start off with our icebreaker question, what is your favorite superpower?
I'm going to steal Blake Parrish's answer because it feeds nicely into what we just talked about, which is the ability to like just repair yourself instantly. If I had that ability, it would be really nice. I am somewhat prone to injury. I really think I'm prone to risk taking. And so I have a tendency to do things I am not capable of doing, which then results in injury. And I would really love to be able to repair that very quickly. And as you age, it's true. I'm not super old. I'm 38 for those who were wondering, but that's old enough to start feeling like injuries matter a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Give us 60 seconds on your road to Maze.
Can I do 120 maybe?
Of course.
I'm just kidding. I'll try to do it as fast as I can. So I was working in public accounting in Houston. And we, at the time, I'm not saying that this is indicative of public accounting now. Public accounting is a fantastic career. I actually loved it, probably too much. Really loved working in public accounting. And so I worked a lot when I was in public accounting. But I had been working a lot. My college roommate was displaced by Hurricane Katrina, and she and her husband and their 2 dogs were living in my 1,000 square foot condo in the Galleria area. And so they said, hey, can we come stay with you? And I said, absolutely. I'm not home. We were working so much that we were staying in a hotel next to the office so that we just didn't have to drive and things like that. And so I was like, I'm never home, like literally not even sleeping there, just stay in the condo. And so they did. And we had a day off after working over 100 hours in a week. And she and I went to lunch one day together because we were about to go back and do it on another client. And she said, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a partner at the firm. I love it here. I love working this much. I just really enjoy it. And she asked me 3 times, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I answered a partner every time. And the 4th time she said, if money didn't matter, what would you want to be? And I said, if money didn't matter, I would want to be a college professor. And she was like, well, I think that you should do that. I said, thanks for the advice. I'm going to be a partner. And she said, no, I'm serious. I think you should do that. And I said, well, maybe I will look into teaching a night class at U of H. I said, but I've always thought of that going back into academia as a job I would do when I retired, not now. And I worked as a graduate assistant my 5th year here. So I did my undergrad in accounting, my master's in finance in a 5th year program. So it was all one program. And in my 5th year, I worked as a graduate assistant in the Career Center. And they offered me a job at the end of it. And so I was filling in for somebody who was on maternity leave in a full-time position. And so they offered me that position when I finished that year. And I said, no, I'm going to go be a partner. Maybe I'll come back to academia someday. And several people had said, oh, you're going to come back. You're going to come back. Well, when I retire, maybe I'll come back. And so that was a Wednesday that we had taken off, and I had gone to lunch with my college roommate. And she said, I think you should go back to academia. And I said, well, I will look into teaching the class at U of H. That's what I'll commit to. And the next morning was a Thursday, and I got into the office and had a voicemail from one of my old professors here. And he said, hey, we have a position open. Would you consider coming back and doing it? It's a staff position. It's advising. I know you want to teach. You could probably do that in about a year. Would you want to do it? And I called him back and I said, no, I want to be a partner. Thanks for the offer. And I sat there and worked on a spreadsheet for 2 hours. And I thought, I am really enjoying this. I don't know. I probably am enjoying it too much in that I'm going to work all the time. That's all I'm going to do. And if I want my life to be a little bit more balanced, I probably need to be in a place where I could do that. And I just had this conversation yesterday with my college roommate where she told me I should maybe think about going back to the university. And I got a call today offering me a job. And I was like, yeah, that's probably something I need to really think about. And so I called him back 2 hours later and I said, I'll take it. He said, well, you have to come actually interview for it. And I was like, oh, yeah. And he was like,
that's right. What I meant.
Yeah. He was like, but it's yours if you want it. So I went and interviewed and took the job, came back here. And so then I started as an academic advisor and then started teaching accounting. And I've been here for 13 years. I always thought I would teach when I retired. And so I always like to tell people that I just retired early and get to do that job now and hang out with students. And it's great. Right now, it doesn't feel so much like retirement, these administrative jobs, but
This deaning
feels like a job some days.
You've been working at May since I was 10 years old. I'm just kidding.
That's gross. That's so gross, Kyle. I actually was somewhere the other day and said something, and one of our students goes, oh, I was born then. And I was like, yeah, moving on.
Never going to talk to you again.
I don't, I've always been kind of the youngest. So coaching swim team, I started doing that at 15. And I think that I had a friend that I coached with, and we pitched to this team that we could be head coaches at 16. And like most head coaches were in their 30s. So it wasn't like that was a normal thing. And I look at them like, what were they thinking for one?
How old were who's the oldest swimmer?
18.
Oh.
Yeah. So I swam and coached at the same time.
Ooh.
Yeah. We had 200 kids from ages, technically 4, but you're supposed to be about 6, but we would take a 4-year-old if they were, if they could swim across the pool, but from 4 to 18. Wow. And we were 16 years old. And he pitched that we would head coach. And at first they had us like co-head coach with someone else. And then we took over the next year. But I'm like, man, that was crazy. But I've always been kind of the youngest person in the room. And that is not so true anymore. And it's kind of weird. You know, we had some students in our executive MBA program that were younger than me this year. And I was like,
It's happening, huh?
I also asked them, like, do I look that old? They were like, yeah. I mean, not that you look old, but they don't either. And I mean, yeah, that's how old you are. I was like, okay, I'll remember that. Good to know. It'll benefit me in a lot of ways, not being the youngest person in the room. That's never been a problem for me, but it certainly has been a problem for other people. So it's all right that I'm aging, but it's an adjustment.
You know what's interesting? This like popped in my head while you were talking about that. Now in MBAs, in the MBA classes, I was recording for Mike Alexander for like 4 or 5 days, and they did a decision matrix. Is that right?
Yes.
And the example was you.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, like it weirdly sounded familiar, and that just popped into my head. It was like, oh yeah, use the decision matrix to get yourself here and to your other stuff.
So we teach a decision-making matrix, which at the top has criteria for success. So what would make this a successful decision? And then alternatives on the columns are criteria for success, the rows are alternatives. And the question you're asking is, what alternatives would lead to a successful decision or a decision that meets the criteria for success that you've defined, which is helpful for me in making decisions. So I used it because I went from teaching a lot more, being on faculty. I did have an administrative position. I was the assistant department head for the accounting department, but I was much more teaching than I was administration. Mm-hmm. And so then I was thinking about got an offer to move into the full-time MBA director position, which was going to be quite a bit more administration than teaching. And so that was where I used the decision-making matrix, and I use it frequently, and then used it to come over to the assistant dean position too.
That's cool. Well, I think you segued that pretty beautifully. So speaking of Mike Alexander, as we usually do, we are going to take a few of his questions. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Sugar Land, Texas, which is just outside of Houston, the sweetest city in the world. Mm-hmm.
Cool. I have a lot of family in Sugar Land.
Mm-hmm.
How many in your family?
There are 4. So I have just one sister who is awesome in so many ways. And then my parents.
Awesome. What was your first job?
My first job was coaching swim team. I think I've talked about that a little bit on the show, but coaching swim team. I taught a lot of swim lessons too. I loved it so much. I was also a lifeguard that summer, and I was terrible at that part. So I only did that one summer. But I coached for, I think, 8 years or so.
Oh, wow.
Why were you bad at lifeguarding? Because you had to sit still?
Yes. Oh. So it was completely boring. I also was not very confident in it. So there was a little kid whose parents were not watching them that came over from the baby pool and jumped into the big pool. And it was very crowded. It was like 4th of July weekend or Memorial Day weekend, one of those where it was just really, really crowded. And I had no line of sight on that kid. And ultimately, another adult saw him and picked him up, and he was fine. But in that moment, there are things I should have blown the whistle, gotten down, and made sure the kid was okay. But I remember sitting there going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do right now. I can see the kid's fine, but the child needed to be checked on. But I was like, I don't even know. I just never felt confident in it. I after that realized I never wanted to be responsible for someone else's life in that way. I did not like that feeling. So I felt bored and paranoid the whole time. And I just didn't, that was not a good combination for me.
I was going to say, that sounds like a winning.
Yeah.
winning setup.
Winning. Yeah, it was not good. But teaching swim lessons was great because it was totally active. I was constantly having to think, so this child's not doing what I want them to do, or they're afraid right now. What can I do that's going to make them more comfortable so they can learn this thing? That was fun.
Cool. What was your greatest challenge as a child?
First, I'll say my childhood was idyllic in every way. Like, my parents are incredible. They are the happiest married people besides my grandparents that I know.
Mm-hmm.
They are so loving towards us. They were the adoptive parents of a million of our friends who needed them longer term or temporarily. They always were just that family. Everybody was always at our house. Like, it was just a great environment. It was pretty Leave It to Beaver. But I think if I think about the challenges I created for myself as a child, it was oftentimes because I'm very much a people pleaser. And so I wanted people to like me. I wanted to do what my friends wanted me to do, which sometimes meant compromising my values or, just doing things that I'm not proud of. And now with distance, it matters less. But, there's just times where I think, that was probably the core of where I had tension or challenges, was in trying to please people and be what they wanted me to be.
What did your parents/family do for a living, and how did that impact you?
Yeah, that's a good question. My dad was in sales, and I think that probably impacted me in a few ways. But so in that, and we've talked about this on the show before, just what's the worst that they can say no, and not worrying about no. Not that I'm that good at that, but he definitely, that was constantly teaching us that. But he also, he started a business, which was really good. I was young, maybe 2 or 3, and he started a business that was really good. And then it wasn't. It was right during the time of the oil crisis in Houston. And so the capital dried up. So he had a loan that went away, and then even though his business was doing well at the time, it just wasn't sustainable without the loan. And so that created some instability that I think probably made accounting very attractive to me. That accounting is a place where you can have a job. I mean, if you're decent at it, you can have a job all the time. And so, I saw that and I was like, oh, I don't know that I want a job where there's that much risk involved. So I went for the steadier path. I'd actually planned on going into advertising, but that's also kind of a harder environment to be in and maybe less stable. And so I chose accounting instead. And I think that was part of it. My mom is in kind of an administrative assistant, has always been that. She was an office manager of a law firm for a long time. And now is working as an administrative assistant. I don't actually know what her title is. I should ask her that. In internal audit at Centerpoint Energy. And so does great stuff with them. She should have been an accountant or a lawyer, and she was more than capable of doing that. She got a degree in education and wanted to be a teacher, and then did that for a few years and realized she did not like that at all. So went a different path.
Getting into your career, you pretty much started in the thick of it. All of this world as far as accounting and, the real steady jobs, far from that. And you were with one of the big 4 companies, PwC, spending nearly 2 years there. What would you call your experience?
The best part of public accounting is that you learn so much so fast. And I really appreciated that about the job. And it's constantly different and challenging. I always tell our students now, we talk a lot about uncertainty and being more uncomfortable. And we talk a lot about uncertainty and being more comfortable with certain uncertainty. And so I'll tell my students, I would get a new project every day. I never worked on the same thing, almost never worked on the same thing twice. And so it was a matter of getting something and having that kind of sinking feeling in your stomach, like, I have no idea how to do this. And then going, but I know I can figure it out. And having that confidence to say, I know that I can figure it out, and living in that uncertainty for a minute and pushing through it. And I think that was really good practice for that, for gaining confidence that I could figure it out, and then feeling comfortable with that feeling of, I don't know if I can do this.
So when David came on, he talked about some parties they would have to celebrate how they got this auditing thing done. Was that part of your world?
Yeah.
I know that you spoke a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So David Wiggins was on the show. He talked a little bit about there were multiple times where celebrations were important. One was filing. So the client files, and it was a little bit tricky because the client files and they're done. When the client files, we just moved on to a new client.
Oh.
So for example, that I told you that Wednesday I went and had lunch with my college roommate who was staying with me, who I hadn't seen in 2 weeks. We were filing. We were getting ready for the client to file. And so we had worked a lot. And then we had a day off. And that was kind of our celebration. Or we would stay in the office while they were at the printer, which David talked a little bit about the printer. And so we were in the office and they would call us and say, hey, we need this number changed, or go audit this number really quick because they need to make a change and we need to make sure that's the right number. And so we would be in the office doing those kinds of things until really late at night. And then they would file. Their celebrations were probably more exciting and expensive than ours, but we would have our own celebration. And like sometimes we would have a day off and get to do something really nice for ourselves on the firm, like go get a massage or something as a team, or something like that. I mean, we weren't all in the same room, don't worry.
I was like,
but go as a team, have a spa day or something like that. That was nice to celebrate. But then we would roll on to a new client. So it was pretty rare that, and then your new client would file, and that was nice, but it never really ended. And part of that was I came out of school right when a new legislation called Sarbanes-Oxley came out. I won't bore you with the details, but it created significantly more work in the time that I was in public accounting than had been before. And things just hadn't quite adjusted yet to that. And so, it became a little bit more of a year-round thing versus it used to have busy seasons that were just around filing, but just became a longer process.
So looking at your LinkedIn, I felt like you went through Maze up the ladder pretty quickly. So what did you do? What helped you? What do you feel like maybe you got lucky at some points? How did you get here so fast?
Absolutely. Well, and I don't know that it was fast. I will say it's not traditional. So I came in a staff position and moved to a faculty position. That doesn't happen so often. So I don't want people to think, if I go in and become an academic advisor, I can go and teach. So it's not a traditional path. So I think that's one place where I was kind of lucky, certainly in the right place at the right time. I remember, the great Linda Perry taught Accounting 327. She was my Accounting 327 teacher. That's intermediate accounting for people who took accounting at a different school. But if you're an accounting major, intermediate accounting. It is notoriously the hardest class. People call it a weed out class. That's never how I taught it or intended it to be. But it is very hard. And it is a good class to decide, one, can I be an accounting major? Because if you can't cut it in intermediate accounting, then the decision may be made for you. But do I want to be an accounting major? Do I like this enough? And that's what I found a lot of times, people who didn't do well in 327, it was either they didn't have enough background knowledge or they just didn't like accounting enough to study it as much as you have to study it to do well in that class. But the great Linda Perry taught that course before I did. And she taught here for many years. She was my Accounting 327 professor. She was wonderful and marvelous. And so I had been here about a year as an advisor, and she left. And the department was like, we can't replace Linda Perry. Like, how are we going to do this? And I had been teaching like the Becker CPA exam classes. I knew that I wanted to teach. I mean, that was why I came back. And so I went to the department head, and this is, again, my dad in my head saying, what's the worst they can say is no, and go try it. And so I said, I want to teach. And here's why I think I'm capable of doing that, and evidence that I could do that well. And he was like, okay. And I'm thinking, I want to teach 229 and whatever. And he goes, how about 327? And I was like, again, that sinking feeling of like uncertainty. I don't know if I can do this. And I'm like, I've figured out hard things before. I can do this. And so put me in, coach, I'm ready to go. And maybe that's a overconfidence that it's worked for me. It's fine. And so I started teaching again, which was a little bit of luck, a little bit of timing, a little bit of being willing to put myself out there and be vulnerable, and then maybe having some skills, although there wasn't a lot to build on that he was going to go, you know what? Yeah, you're an amazing teacher. I just had some classroom experience that he had witnessed, and it was enough for him to take a chance. And then, so I taught for a long time. And at the same time, I had done a little bit of administrative work for the department head. Jim Benjamin has been an amazing mentor, an amazing boss, just really catapulted my career. I mean, it has been the biggest influence in my career. So that's a place where luck was huge. And he's been at Mays for 45 years, and he's been a department head. He's the longest running department head in the United States. The accounting department is actually now the James Benjamin Department of Accounting. It's named after him because so many people know the impact that he's had on Mays Business School and the Department of Accounting. And so Jim was able to take some chances that someone else might not have been. So had that been a new department head, they probably wouldn't have felt comfortable taking some chances on me. I had done some administrative work for him and some of the things that an assistant department head typically does. And so he came to me and said, hey, I want you to teach and I want you to do some of the things that an assistant department head does. And he said, I don't know if I can get you the title, but I think, you can have the responsibilities. And I was like, hey, work on that title, buddy. Like, let's make that happen. And so he did and made it happen. And again, because he has so much credibility and people trust him around here, when he said, hey, I want to make her assistant department head, they said, okay, which again was kind of crazy because I hadn't done any of those things, but it was great. I did them. I think where maybe my strengths come into play that have helped my career is that I'm willing to work really hard. I'm willing to take on things that, it's the same thing that gets me injured in wakeboarding and sports that I haven't gotten injured in the job, fortunately, but I'm willing to take on things that I can't necessarily do yet. And I don't necessarily believe in fake it till you make it, because I wouldn't present myself as if I could do something, but I will definitely present myself as I could figure it out. And then I'll come and ask questions when I need to. And so I think that's helped. And I really think the public accounting got me comfortable with that and taught me that. And then I've translated that into my career. And then I also, in my teaching, was willing to do some things that I think other people weren't willing to do. So I flipped my classes, which means I created a lot of videos and outside content that students could do. And then in class, I didn't lecture. We worked through problems and really worked together on things. And that was kind of I came in at the right time, again, luck. That was kind of a hot movement at the time that I did it, probably 2010. And so I got in on the ground floor on that and really moved us forward in that direction. And that got me a lot of attention from a teaching perspective and helped other people know me. And the assistant department head job, I was in front of a lot of other people I wouldn't necessarily have been as a faculty member. That again, then people knew my name, knew what I was capable of doing, which was really helpful. And then Dr. Balachetti asked me to take on the full-time MBA director position. And I also said no, I believe, at first, and then thought about it more and what that would do for my career that I wouldn't necessarily have access to in the accounting department as assistant department head. And so that got me into this unit, which got me exposure to a lot of different people. And I've learned so much in that position about, as a faculty member, we've talked about this on the show before, you're really an independent contractor. You kind of do your own thing. And when you want, where you want, how you want, your classroom is your classroom. And, there certainly is oversight, but it's much looser than in most office environments. Mm. And so moving here, it was, okay, now there's all of these people that I work with in a more traditional way, and we're really dependent on each other. And so what does that mean from a manager perspective, from managing processes where I'm not the only one, I'm not just relying on me, I'm relying on a lot of other people. They need me to think about their needs in a way that I didn't have to before. And so I just learned so much in that process. And And then Dr. Mahajan asked me if I wanted to take this assistant dean position. So that's kind of the progress. It's not a traditional path. So I definitely wouldn't say, Shannon did that thing and that's what I'm going to do too. And maybe no path is traditional. It is that combination of luck and being in the right place at the right time and certainly hard work, because I have worked very hard in the time that I'm here, but hard work alone would not have put me on the same path. So it was a lot of luck, a lot of, Jim, Bala, Arvin believing that I could do something and giving me a chance to try doing it. And maybe I would have failed and maybe I would have succeeded, but they gave me the chance and then it was mine to do with it.
Other than the fact that you work really hard and you're willing to work really hard, do you think if you had to point to one thing that they all saw in you that said, I'm comfortable with this person on this non-traditional path, what would you point to?
It's a good question. I mean, it's something that I probably should think about more and have been starting to think about more because even back to my coaching days, I have always relied on being a hard worker as the thing that got me through, as a thing that differentiated me. I'm just willing to work longer and harder than you are, and not necessarily than you two are, but I'm willing to work longer and harder than most people, and that's going to get me ahead. And that's not sustainable. Listeners, Kyle, Ackerman, that is not sustainable. And I remember when I was in the MBA director position, I met with Mike Kinney when he came when he was the assistant dean for graduate programs before I was. And he had maybe been in this position 6 months or a year. And I said, I want some feedback. And he said, look, here's all the things you do really well. He said, your life does not seem sustainable. And I was like, well, my first retort was, neither is yours. So like, what are you going to do about that? But
that says a lot about him and y'all's relationship.
Oh yeah. No, I mean, I'm so grateful for him having given me that candid feedback. And it's not the first time I had heard it. I mean, Dr. Benjamin was very careful about my time. He would always basically 1 in, 1 out. Okay, if you're going to take on that commitment, what are you going to give up? If there is a mistake that I've made in my career, where I get close to making a mistake in my career, I'm having trouble even saying this is a mistake because it's benefited me so much, is taking on too much. And I am more concerned with quantity than quality, just naturally in my life. I am not a perfectionist. I like for things to be good, but I do not need them to be perfect. And I think that's benefited me a lot too, in that I can churn out a lot. I can churn out a lot in writing. I can churn out a lot in getting work done because I don't need it to be totally perfect. I need it to be good enough and reliable. But if I have a typo in an email, I don't care. I don't feel bad about that. Like one typo in an email, moving on. So I can do a lot. But because I can do a lot doesn't necessarily mean that I should all the time.
You sort of answered the question. And as you were sort of answering the question, I think let me take a shot at answering the question because I feel like
I evaded the question.
So I think it's 2 things. It's not 1, it's 2. The first one is you care about people. You care. And everybody knows you care. Everybody believes you care. And so they believe in your ability to see and to do what's best for them, in addition to what's best for yourself, best for the department, best for the university. That's 1. 2 is you have a keen eye and you're constantly thinking about what matters versus what doesn't matter. And the typo in the email thing kind of plays to that.
Right.
It's how do we optimize? And we optimize by emphasizing this and at the same time, de-emphasizing that.
Yeah, no, and I think that's important. And so I wasn't trying to evade the question. It was just a very long way of answering it. No, it's good. Because I think I do want our listeners to hear that working harder is not sustainable. It's also not a key differentiator. Someone else can work harder than you. And so I don't think that that's the best way to go about it, but it's taken kind of this long in my career for me to go, what is it that's my differentiator? And because I make enough money, I have gotten the title that I want, a title that I never dreamed I could have gotten. So I don't need to work hard for the sake of working hard, certainly. But Mike Alexander was introducing me. Mike's been a theme on the show today. Mike Alexander was introducing me to a group of students the other day, and he said something I hadn't thought of before, but I do think could be my key differentiator, is he said, she will make this program better because she can't help it. She cannot let something, like I cannot look at this program all of our graduate programs or
this
podcast or whatever it is and go, that could be better, and let it stay that way. Now, again, not perfect, but better. And I think that's where the what matters and what doesn't matter. Yeah. So what is the thing? I will say, hey, we don't need to edit this thing to death. It doesn't need to be perfect. But if there's something we could tweak that's going to make it really even better, let's do it. And we're going to make that happen. And because I'm willing to, on top of that, do the hard work that it might take to get there, I think that combination works well. And I think that's what probably all of those people saw. And I mean, I know the systems of Mays really well and of Texas A&M really well, and that helps a lot. And there are other smaller things that go in there, but I think I'm not going to leave it alone. I'm not going to stop messing with it.
From the very beginning, I'm talking an hour after you and I shook hands about this project. I'm interested in hearing about your PhD because it struck me. I was like, bachelor's in accounting, master's in finance, financial management, seems pretty linear. Why? Why did you go into education and HR development?
Yeah, good question. So I started the PhD, I think I had been here at Mays about 6 years, maybe 5 years. And so I also need to send some good bull to Austin Daly, who is another person who had a huge impact on my career. So he's the person who called when I was at PwC and said, hey, do you want to come back to A&M? And I had done, when I was in the graduate assistant position, had done some work with him doing like career development for PPA students. So for the students that were like a year behind me or 2 years behind me in the program. And we had really worked well together. He was really pleased with the work that I did. And so that was nice to have that connection. So he was the one that brought me back. So I worked for him first when I came back to Mays. And that was so important for so many reasons for my development. And in that time, he said, you need a doctor in front of your name. He's like, it doesn't matter what it is, just get a PhD. And he was like, you can go, do a speaking circuit. If you've got that doctor in front of your name, you can do whatever you want to do. You'd be a great public speaker. You should go do that. And so that didn't, the sentiment was good. It was like, PhD, good. But a PhD in anything, I was like, I don't just want to do a PhD in anything. And P.S. to our listeners, don't do a PhD in just anything, because it is, a 5-year commitment of blood, sweat, and tears. And I mean, you're pouring a lot of yourself in that. So it needs to be something you're really passionate about. So I took the advice. I knew I wanted to do a PhD, but I couldn't find anything. I was like, I don't know what I want to do a PhD in. I knew I didn't want to do a PhD in business because I just wasn't going to go that tenure track route. We talk about that in the bonus episode that we do with Dr. Devers. And so you can hear that there. But I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I also didn't want to quit my job. So I was going to need to be doing a part-time program. And so I started looking at programs at A&M, at other places. And I came across an article. One of the things that you're supposed to do when you're looking into a PhD is look at the research that people in those departments do. And I came across, I think it was a book chapter that Dr. Mary Alfred and Dr. Dominique Klupp had written together. And there was a word in there called, there was a phrase in the book chapter, emancipatory learning. And it was not a phrase I had heard before. I had obviously heard the term emancipation or emancipatory and learning, but I had never heard those two things combined. And it just struck me hard that learning, and it's a concept I had thought about before, but that learning could be emancipatory. It could be freeing for people. It could lead them to a new path. And I really thought, I love my students here at Texas A&M, but someone else could come in and teach them accounting and they are still going to be fine. Like they are. And that's true. I teach very little accounting now, and the graduates of Mays Business School with an accounting major are fine. They didn't need me specifically. So I tried to think about who are the people in the world that might need, and that maybe sounds a little conceited. I don't mean it that way, but who are the people that maybe no one else is thinking about? Who are the people that I could really help in a way that someone else couldn't, or that I'd be uniquely positioned to help? And so that phrase alone, and then I went down the path of looking at more of the research in that field. And I specifically focused on, within education, human resource development, I specifically focused on adult education, which is a very social justice focused field. Ryan and I were actually just watching a bunch of TV and documentaries and things that really were opening my eyes. We talked about it a little bit on the show with The Wire. We were watching The Wire and I was like, oh man, there's just so much more of a world out there. On The Wire, they have a little community called Hamsterdam. And I think about you have to watch the show, but I think about there's like this other world that, Hamsterdam, it's a whole different world that I'm not engaging with and being a part of. And I wanted to try to expand my horizons a little bit more. And so I felt just kind of drawn to the education, human resource development PhD in a way that I didn't to other PhDs I had looked at. And so that was when I finally made the commitment, applied, and started the program.
What did you focus on in your research?
Yeah. I did my research on women who had exited the sex trade. So I looked at their experiences transitioning from the sex trade and learning as they went from the sex trade to legal employment. And there's a lot involved there. I looked at what employers and businesses were doing that helped women exiting the sex trade, or even were harmful for women exiting the sex trade, what was productive and counterproductive. I looked at the learning that they experienced as they transitioned through, how they learned. So a lot of the learning was observation of other people. So one of the most interesting findings from my study was not a finding I sought to discover, but in the literature about the sex trade. So, and this is mostly literature from academics who sit in their nice, cozy office and research the sex trade. And there's a big debate in feminist literature about, do we call the sex trade sex work, which is a more liberal approach, and that sex work is a form of work like any other form of work that women could choose if they want to, could be liberating for them if they choose it. That's kind of the sex work field. The prostitution side is that prostitution is a human rights violation, and women don't actually choose to go into prostitution. They only go that direction because of societal influences that might move them in that direction. So those are kind of two extremes, and then there's different levels of agency or choice along that line. And so there's all this debate in the literature about that. And so the first question that I asked women when I interviewed them was, what do you call what you did? Do you call it sex work or do you call it prostitution? And the first woman that I asked that, I was actually piloting the questions with someone, so this wasn't even an interview. She just laughed at me. She was like, oh, you sweet girl, you have no idea. And I was like, what? I mean, all the literature, sex work, prostitution, it's this huge debate. Like, which one do you call it? And she said, we don't call it either one of those things. I was like, okay, what do you call it? And most of the women that I interviewed called it the lifestyle. Some of them called it the game. That was kind of an older term for it. So people who were much older called it the game. But most people called it the lifestyle. And that was really significant for several reasons. One is, when you think about the term the lifestyle, you're embedded in that, right? And one of the women actually coined the term the lifestyle mindset. And she talked about how much your way of thinking is embedded in the lifestyle. So it affected, she said when she first got into the lifestyle, people would make fun of her for how well she spoke. They were like, oh, you're educated. She used a different term, but you're educated. And by the time that she left, no one could even understand her. No one outside of the lifestyle could understand the way that she spoke. I mean, one, she constantly cussed, which is, whether you morally think that's wrong or not, it doesn't work in general society to just every word be a cuss word. And then also it was broken English. And so she talked about, as did many of them, talked about how she was like a child and had to relearn everything, from the way that she talked to the way that she dressed, to the way that she thought about things. She even said she was like, if you, and this research is out there so you can read the quotes more in their words, but she basically said, if you had called my pimp when I first left, I would have slapped you. I called him my husband. I thought of him as my husband. She was like, he beat me. He kept my money. He did nothing that a husband should or would do. He was definitely my pimp, but I didn't know that. She's like, the lifestyle mindset told me that he was my husband. And it wasn't until she left and she actually had a counselor who was also a survivor of the sex trade who said, hey, maybe he wasn't. I mean, and they weren't legally married, but maybe talking about him as your husband isn't as accurate as you think. Let's think through that and talk through that.
Mm-hmm. Before we move on from this, the thing that I noticed the most in all of what you just said, there was a ton of it, but lifestyle actually kind of suggests something aspirational to me. It sounds like they're referring to it as a thing to be aspired to, and the irony of that is noteworthy.
Yeah, and I think even the way that you said that is interesting, like that the irony of that is noteworthy, because I think a lot of us would say that's not the lifestyle that we would want. But
is it a lifestyle that they felt like they were leaving something valuable behind in leaving it?
Yeah, and that's really interesting. And this is the piece where the people who are debating this sex work and prostitution really debate it hard. And what I can say is I don't know, I wasn't in it. But what I can also add to that from the women who were is that in retrospect, it is not a favorable lifestyle. They would definitely describe it more as a human rights violation than as work. They were assaulted at gunpoint, knife point. They were beaten. They were sexually assaulted, physically assaulted. They lived a very hard lifestyle. Almost all of the women that I interviewed were also addicts, drug addicts. And so it was a difficult lifestyle. And yet they were very embedded in it, is how I would say. They were very embedded in it. So there's a transition theory by Bridges in 1991, to properly cite him. And the first phase of that transition model is endings. And it's about giving up routines and relationships that you had before. And it could be a transition when you find out about having an illness, like finding out that you have cancer. It could be getting a divorce. There are lots of transitions that can take us through that. This is one example, women leaving the sex trade, where they had to leave literally everything. Mm-hmm. Every relationship they had ended completely. And they had to make new relationships with people. So some of them were families, children, parents, that they had betrayed their trust multiple times. So they went from having these relationships with people, pimps, friends, other women who were in the sex trade to having to restore relationships that were hard. They were so hard. They had to go from a way of speaking, a way of dressing, a way of living, a place of living to a new place. And they'd had a lot of, and a lot of this is complicated to even say because the words are hard. So I was about to say they had a lot of perceived freedom, at least in the lifestyle, where they could do whatever they wanted. They would talk about, a lot of them talked about how they could, when they first exited, they were making $8 an hour as a fry cook or a waitress, or they were doing different things. But that was really hard because nothing about that was glamorous. Nothing about being a fry cook. The woman who talked about that, she was like, I had grease all over me. My skin was breaking out. Nothing was glamorous about making very little money as a fry cook or rolling tamales, or they did all kinds of things. And they knew at the same time that they had a list. They would say, I had a list of numbers I could call. I had a list of people, Johns, men who would buy sex. I had a list of people I could call that would pay me $1,000 for one interaction. And I'm going to sit here and make $8 an hour. It's demoralizing. It's hard. It's not fun. And so you're leaving this lifestyle with some perceived freedoms, with more income. They talked a lot about kind of a false sense of accomplishment. Like, I'm good at this job. I'm good. I get picked. I get picked when I'm out on the street. That felt good. It's validation for how you look, for your reputation and that. And then I'm going to leave. And most of them lived in a house of some kind of a home, whether it was a drug rehabilitation facility or a home that was helping them exit, or some of them came out of prison and went into some of these homes. They were living in a home that provided a lot of structure, a lot of rules. That perceived freedom was gone, and they were making $8 an hour. So when you talk about, when you're comparing those two lifestyles, it's tough. I mean, it's hard. Yes, the lifestyle, working in the sex trade, is hard. And with time and distance, they could look back on that and say, that was hard. I don't want to do that. But the relapse back into the lifestyle is really, really high. Women come out and return with great frequency. And it's that draw, it's that pull, it's the false sense of accomplishment, it's the lifestyle mindset, it's thinking your value is in the way that you look, in the amount of money that you earn, that they said was the lifestyle mindset. That's not necessarily true. And one of the things that they talked about with the money, that making $8 an hour, yes, is a lot less money, but they oftentimes retained more of that money than when they were making $1,000 in a day, because they worked more consistently. When they were in the sex trade, they were spending money on drugs and clothes, in their words, not mine, but they were spending money on drugs and clothes. And so when you're, making less money, but being really conscious about the way that you spend that, it actually goes a lot farther.
How did this make you feel? How did all of the interviews, spending all this time hearing these things from these women, how did this make you feel?
The thing that I took away from a feeling perspective, I think, is that these women are so strong and so real and raw. I had a hard time after doing the interviews kind of integrating back with my friends, and not even my friends, because I have a lot of good friends who I can have real and raw conversations with. I had a hard time being patient with my students, because when they would come to me with a complaint about the food at an event, or a professor not being the best, or whatever it was, it just felt so incredibly trivial. The students that for a while, and I've with some distance have moved through this, but the students for a while that I could relate with the best were our veterans, because they felt the same way. They felt, stop complaining about the little stuff because they had personally been through real stuff, right? They had been through some big things, and I had not been through those big things myself, but I had seen, I had interacted so closely with women who had, that it felt like, similar. I could relate to that. I could understand their experiences better. So if a veteran came and complained about something, that carried a little bit more weight for me for a while, because I thought, well, this is an issue big enough to rise to the surface. And I don't think that was fair, the way that I felt, but it was a byproduct of that experience of interacting with them. And it did make me think about my relationships a little bit more. I wanted, and this podcast, we've talked about it, like it kind of ruins you for superficial conversations. And I think probably doing the dissertation study that I did has sort of led me to this path of, I want real, raw, open conversations in my life. And the other more superficial conversations, the friends that with, where the relationships were more superficial, or I don't need that as much. And so, there was a lot of hope in the experience, a lot more hope than sadness in the experience of interviewing the women. Certainly, they told some horrific stories that were sad, but all of them had overcome. All of them had been out of the sex trade for more than 3 years. And they had done some amazing things. So the connection to business too is, again, they're all working. All of the women I interviewed were working. Some of them had started their own businesses. They were doing amazing things. One of them, and this is very true, she called herself a pillar of her community, and she is. She said, I went from being a crackhead prostitute to a pillar of my community. That is the kind of stuff, you could sit in the pain and sorrow of being the crackhead prostitute, but they were so far past that I got to really sit in the amazingness of how far they had come and how real and raw they were about those experiences, and what where those experiences had led them, and all of the resilience and resourcefulness that they had that brought them there. One of the other most interesting findings from the study was that all of the women had many skills that they had gained throughout their lives, even skills they had gained in the sex trade. They did not believe that those skills had value. So for their whole lives, they were told, or at least their whole lives in the sex trade, they were told they were manipulative. They were told that all they did was hustle. Well, all they needed was for someone to say, those skills are valuable. Those skills are very valuable in business, but here's what they look like. Manipulation is really motivation, and flip that. Use it for good. Hustling is really selling, and you do that every day, all day in business. So here's how you can translate those skills. Don't push them down. Don't devalue them. They need to be switched a little, but here's how you can switch them to become things that are really going to be powerful things for you in business, in working for an employer. And that was cool to see. So a lot of it was so much more hopeful than it was hard or sad for me. But one of the side effects was just everything else felt really trivial because of what they had experienced.
I could definitely imagine. I mean, it's kind of, when I was thinking about it, I just thought about Chris. He's like, it's kind of hard to come back and live life the way he did after seeing all what has happened. But if you don't mind, I'd like to transition into that.
Yeah.
You're a board member for Chris Field's Mercy Project.
Yeah.
How has that been?
Yeah, it's been amazing. And so I want to be clear that the value I think I bring to the research and the value the research maybe brings to the business school, because I realize that doesn't sound connected, is that I try to look at everything from a business perspective. So being part of Mercy Project, I look at from a business perspective too. And so again, I looked at how the women were now working in businesses, owning their own businesses, how businesses could help women, marginalize women. And so I've kind of done the same thing with Mercy Project, which has been fun. And we're working on some new things to one of Chris's big focus with Mercy Project. So Mercy Project, if you haven't heard Chris's show, rescues children who have been bought by another village in Ghana to fish in that village. And they do that in a way that is sustainable. So there were organizations that went in and would buy children who had been sold before and then bring them back to their families. And those children would just be sold again. Mm-hmm. The way that Mercy Project does it is that they provide the villages with an alternative way to fish. So they farm fish instead of fishing in the lake. So it eliminates the need for children being bought from another village to fish on the lake because they have the farm fishing, which is much more productive. So that was very attractive to me about Mercy Project because they took, and that was where our business solutions to social problems class came from, is that you're taking these very business-minded solutions and applying them to a social problem, which is much more sustainable than a lot of nonprofits think. Right now, Chris's goal is to create more jobs in Ghana. Mm-hmm. So Mercy Project reintegrates children back into their home and also educates them through high school. But there's high unemployment and underemployment in Ghana for people who graduate with a high school degree. And Mercy Project will likely, they have not had any children graduate from high school yet. They're younger and moving through school right now. But they will likely pay for them to go to college too, if that's the path, or professional school or trade school, if that's the path that children go on. But whenever they graduate, whether it's from high school or college, they are likely to be under or unemployed in Ghana. And so Chris is very conscious about that, of trying to create more jobs in Ghana. And so we're doing some things with inspiring entrepreneurship there and kind of incubator type things in Ghana that are super exciting for me. And I'm thankful with being able to work with some small businesses here. I used to consult a lot more than I do now, but consulting with small businesses and then working with small businesses through like Venture Challenge and working with our startup Aggieland and McFerrin Entrepreneurship Center, I've just really been able to see a lot more of that over the years, having moved into this graduate program space than I would in accounting. And it's been a really nice marriage of some of those skills that I've gained and then getting to work with Mercy Project and thinking about taking those skills to Ghana, which is really cool. And certainly all of it is within the theme of trafficking, which I'm passionate about ending.
Awesome. Rapid fire.
Ooh.
What do you consider your most valuable failure?
So a lot of people have talked about being fired as their most valuable failure. One of mine most lucrative, and from a dollar perspective and a learning perspective, was the first year that I was coaching swim team. I worked for the team that I swam for my whole life, and the coach that I swam for my whole life, who is still one of my heroes. And I probably didn't do a great job that first year. I don't think I did a bad job, but I wasn't working at the level of my work ethic, most likely. And she called me late spring leading into that next summer and said, we have another coach that's returning and we aren't going to need you this year. So technically didn't get fired, but I kind of took it as, all right, kind of got...
We're not renewing your contract.
We're not renewing your contract.
We're not offering you an extension.
There. And I was pretty shocked. I was like, well, that was my plan. And I made $500 that first summer that I coached, by the way. I made a lot more in lessons, but I made $500 coaching. And that was when I went to, and I got a call from a woman that used to babysit us, Kimberly Alley Cool now. And she called and said, hey, I know this team that's looking for somebody. I know you're going to go back and coach for gold, but do you think you'd want to look at this other team? And I was like, actually, I'm not going back to coach for gold because they didn't renew my contract. And so then a guy that I coached with the year before was like, we should pitch that we're going to be the head coaches. And I think I got paid $3,000 that summer, and we got a huge title adjustment. And I knew I had to take it really seriously and, be in the water with the kids every day, even if I was the head coach who normally stands on the side. Like, I need to be in it. And I did that. And it led to a different work ethic, kind of going forward from there. So that was really valuable. The other, I appreciated Janet Marcantonio's answer to this question, which was very non-traditional. And so I want to be clear before I say this, that I don't think this is actually a failure for people out there, but what what can sometimes feel daily like a failure to me is that, as you both know, I have an eating disorder, and that oftentimes feels like something I have to fight and as a failure. But it's valuable because I can see other people's perspectives, other people's struggles and challenges differently than if I didn't have that challenge.
What do you think is people's biggest misconception of you?
Ooh. I mean, I'm going to say the same thing every single other woman has said on the show. Not every single other, but most of them. Ben looks at me now every time a woman says it. Something along the lines of that I'm mean, that I'm
cold,
tough, that I'm
harsh,
cold.
whatever.
Yeah. And it's hard. I mean, I guess, and maybe that's not a misconception, but I think it does. I think I'm counter to what people expect in a woman, that I'm not typically very emotional, that I'm not, that I can be tough and have high expectations. And I think that sometimes leads to a misconception there.
If you could have anyone as a mentor for one day, who would it be?
Ooh, I would pick a singer-songwriter like Amanda Shires or Guy Clark, who has since passed away, Robert Earl Keen or Lyle Lovett, someone like that. I love, as you can tell from that list, if you're familiar with them, I love Texas country. And I would love to be a writer of any kind. I would love to write novels, screenplays, music. Music seems so gratifying because it can be fast. I mean, it can be long too, but you could, knock out songs pretty quickly if you're talented and tell a story really powerfully in a quick way. So then I wouldn't get bored as easily. But I would love to be a songwriter. My dad told me when I was little that I should write Hallmark cards. I don't know why. It's kind of a weird thing, but I could have been that kind of a writer. But I would love to be a better writer. I think I needed to have read much more as a kid to be a better writer now. But I would love that. I would love to be a songwriter and just pick all their brains. Jason Isbell, all those people. I would just love to learn how to really write good music. Good lyrics, especially. I'm not so concerned with the music. Someone else can do that, but the lyrics.
Yeah. What is your fondest memory of Tamu?
I have so many, of course. But I would be remiss not to say that my very favorite memory is getting married on Kyle Field. Ryan wanted to elope, and I did not want to elope. And so I tried to think of a place that we would both really love getting married, but that would be cool enough that it would trump his desire to elope. And so one day I said, "What do you think about getting married on Kyle Field?" And he was like, "Stop playing with my emotions. That's not a joke." And I was like, "I am being very serious. How would you like to get married on Kyle Field?" And he was like, "This is the greatest thing ever." And so we got married on Kyle Field. We got married in the north end zone. Our friends all sat in the north end zone. And then we had the reception in the zone club. So we were actually kind of on the field right by the goalpost. You can see the goalpost in most of our wedding pictures. And it was so fun and unique. I, because I'm heartless is the misconception, don't love weddings. I had been in a lot of them. I had gone to a lot of them single, and you have to do a lot of waiting at weddings. Like, you have to wait to eat and dance, and I love dancing, so let's get that show on the road. So I wanted our wedding to be a little bit different in those ways. So I wanted it to be, and I also had a lot of friends who were not as nice as they normally are on their wedding day. And so I was like, I don't want any misconceptions about what this day is. So it was just really fun. I mean, we had a very traditional ceremony on the field, or not very traditional, but a fairly traditional. I mean, I wore a wedding gown and he wore a tux, and we had a minister that did the whole thing. So it was fairly traditional ceremony. And then at the end of the ceremony, the pastor said, "You don't need to wait for the bride and groom. Just go ahead and go upstairs to the zone club, and you can start eating." And we had free birds at the wedding, of course. And everyone, when he said, you can go ahead and start eating, you don't have to wait for the bride and groom, everyone clapped. They were like, yeah, they were cheering.
Thank goodness.
And we actually ended up making up there quickly because we did the pictures beforehand, but we made it right up there, and we opened the dance floor immediately. My dad has a band that played during the ceremony or during the reception, and so they did their thing, and that was fun, and we got on the dance floor. I also made an announcement, if you want to come see me, I will be on the dance floor. Like, that's where you're gonna find me. And so I stayed there the whole night. It was really fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Do you have anyone you would like to send some good bull?
So many people, but I will send good bull to Amber Acosta, who came and stayed with me this weekend. She is just awesome in so many ways, and a really good friend to me. And she's someone, we were actually talking this weekend about how we can have such in-depth conversations and really push each other to go deeper. And she's someone who I receive feedback from well. She can call me out really well and say, hey, you might think about this. And she was the associate director here when I was the full-time MBA director. And so we worked really closely together. And so I needed her to be able to give me that feedback. And we worked really well together, and I miss her a lot. Sarah Yaksh, the new assistant director. She's not new anymore, but works here, and she and I went wakeboarding yesterday. She came with me, and
that's awesome.
She was awesome. She got the turns down, and she was doing really good. It was fun.
Did she get hit by something?
She got hit by an umbrella
Okay.
that I put up and did not tie down correctly. I didn't know you were supposed to, but
happened.
Yeah. So she has a bruise.
Glad she's
she
okay.
has a bruise too. Yeah,
Okay.
but she's fine. She's doing good.
Well, Shannon, thank you so much. I know this is a long time coming.
Yeah,
and
glad to be here. Fun.
Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to stay up to date on our latest videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications. If you're in a rush or on the road, you can still join us on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find your podcasts. If you want to learn more about us or our guests, please visit our website at mays.tamu.edu/podcasts. Also, please check out Mays Business School's academic programs. They're the sponsors of our show, and you can find them in the description. Thanks, and gig 'em.